Before all you Snyder stans start yelling and pounding your keyboard with your greasy fingers to tell me with the most unoriginal insults ever that no one loves me and I'm completely wrong about this, I just want to say that I am not a Snyder hater. I think he has his strengths, and I think Zack Snyder's Justice League is one of the best superhero movies that I've ever seen. However, I do think that his movies have problems, and I do think there are some major opportunities that he missed out on and some iconic characters that he just outright offended. My opinions are a lot more unique than the comic book Puritans who like to pretend that Zack Snyder is some sort of Ryan Johnson and he came in and ruined their childhood. That's clearly not true. He just has a different take on some of these characters, and I think that's positive in some areas and very negative in other areas. So I'm gonna go over the strengths and the weaknesses of the Snyderverse in this video, but mostly the weaknesses. The first problem with the Snyderverse is that Zack Snyder was chosen in the first place to helm a DC universe, let alone directing a Superman movie. I mean, his tone does not at all jive with the character of Clark Kent. And you can tell because where Superman is usually a bright and hopeful and inspiring character to the people of Earth, he's turned into a nihilistic, unstable man with no regard for human life. So Zack Snyder completely ruined Superman in my opinion, and he wasted the great talent that was Henry Cavill by putting him in a boring, predictable story that did not at all remind you of anything that you liked about Superman. And this is furthered in Batman vs. Superman, where he doubles down, doesn't have any remorse for his actions in Man of Steel, and when Batman brings up the fact that he traded in thousands of lives, unnecessarily I might add, just to take out Zod, he tries to go and kill him, which brings me to my second point. While Man of Steel was okay, Batman vs. Superman was just bad and downright offensive. But Batman wasn't the problem. Lots of people like to blame Batman vs. Superman's demise on Batman, but I actually think Ben Affleck's Batman was handled really well, and I think the problem is Superman. I mean, he's royally screwed up Superman, and the whole tension between Batman and Superman is that Batman is the dark and nihilistic one, and Superman is the bright and hopeful and optimistic person. But in this film, they're both dark and nihilistic, and you just don't get that contrast that you want from those two iconic characters. But Batman was fine. In fact, I really liked the dark nature of Ben Affleck's Batman, and a lot of people like to complain that he kills people, but that's just a different version of Batman, okay? If you're going for the more classic comic-y Batman, kind of like Robert Pattinson, where it doesn't fully exist in the real world and there's still sort of a fantastical element to it, then you probably shouldn't have him kill people because the Gotham is more representative of themes of morality and stuff. But here, Zack Snyder is trying to go for an uber real approach. He's trying to make you believe that the conflict and the fight scenes could actually be happening at some warehouse downtown in your city. And in the real world, it's either kill or be killed. There's no middle ground, especially when you're running with the people that Batman is hanging out with. So I understand the objection to this Batman, but I think the reason that this movie failed was not at all because of Batman. It was because of Superman and because Man of Steel did not set him up properly. And also, of course, all the studio mandates that told him he had to set up a whole bunch of Justice League stuff. Which brings me to my third point. A good amount of the reason why the Zack Snyder movies did not work for a lot of people, myself included most of the time, was that the studio was just mandating him to fit into this tiny little box that he couldn't tell the stories that he wanted to tell in. If Zack Snyder would have had more freedom to really stretch his story out, I'm pretty sure it would have been a lot better and would have been a lot more faithful to the comic books, which is a complaint that a lot of people had. However, Warner Bros. Was trying to catch up to Marvel, so they tried to fast track to a team-up movie in only 2 movies, and they expected that to work, and they expected it to not feel crammed and rushed, but it ended up being that way, and there's really nothing that Snyder could have done about that. So this is really where I have to defend Snyder, because honestly, Batman vs. Superman could have been a really cool movie, because there are a lot of kernels of great ideas that were buried under all the studio mandates and also Snyder's own self-indulgence. And this is perfectly exemplified when you look at Zack Snyder's Justice League, because as soon as he's given the freedom to tell the story that he wants, make it as long as he wants to, and he gets a huge budget, boom, you get one of the best team-up movies, if not one of the best superhero movies of all time. Because he does have a very good artistic vision in some instances, because I did find myself enjoying that movie a lot, especially because when Superman comes back from the dead, he is a darker character, so you can lean more into that nihilistic Superman. And it works there in a way that it did not at all work in Man of Steel or BVS. And the final thing I want to say is that he's not like a great filmmaker, okay? I think a lot of people really like his style because he's unique and he's bold and he has great action scenes and all of his cinematography looks great. But as far as storytelling goes, he drags things out way too long, and that's obviously true in all of the DC movies that he's done. And a lot of the times he tries to tackle complicated themes, it just ends up not making any sense, and it's not really as deep as a lot of people think it is. And you can kind of get that pretentious, self-indulgent feeling that I also really don't like. In my view, there's a big spectrum. On one hand, you have greedy, corporatized movies that are just made from a checklist, like, oh, we need the CGI action, we need a superstar to star in the movie, we need a famous IP, boom, we got a comic book movie. And then on the other side, you have an artist who's too self-indulgent and cares too much about their inner experience and presenting that on film than actually trying to please a more broad audience, right? And I think Zack Snyder goes a little too close to that latter one in a way that I don't really like. So, the Snyderverse has its strengths, for sure, we can all acknowledge that, but it definitely has its weaknesses. I mean, it did get canceled because nobody liked it. So, it's definitely too controversial in the way that it tries to tell stories, and Zack Snyder also has his strengths and weaknesses. But anyways, respectfully, let me know what you thought down in the comments below. Try not to start any big arguments with each other, and I hope to see you back next time I make a video.